These conventions, two of America's most eloquent and most decided commentators have joined us this year. They are Gore Vidal, a former Democratic candidate for Congress, but better known as an author of The Play About a Political Convention, and William F. Buckley, Jr., a former conservative candidate for the mayor of New York, but better known as an editor of the National Review. Mr. Buckley, who of the potential candidates do you think is, if I may steal a title from Mr. Vidal, the best man?
Oh, I'm not prepared to say. I think that several of them are highly qualified to be a good president. I think what you really need to ask me, but are too shy, is who do I like most? To which my answer is that as a conservative, I am very much fetched by the programs of Mr. Reagan and also of Mr. Nixon. I think that Mr. Nixon has convinced the majority of the delegates that he is the best man in the light of his experience, given also the fact that his experience coincides with his commitment to a series of policies which they endorse.
Can Mr. Vidal assess those candidates for us? What do you think of them?
Well, I would come, I think, to a very different point of view. To me, none of them is really the best man. I cannot possibly imagine Richard Nixon as the President of the United States. I think he is essentially the hollow man that we always discussed. I think we're living in revolutionary times in which new programs are needed, and that you're going to need somebody who can really, the young people in the country, the Negroes, the ghetto, the poor, are angry, restless. This is a terrible time, and here you have a man who, when he was in Congress, he voted against public housing, against slum clearance, against rent control, against farm housing, against extending the minimum wage. He was against, rather dubious about the 1954 Supreme Court decision bill. He said, I'm opposed to pensions in any form as it makes loafing more attractive than working. And now today he offers us a program for the ghettos, which he's made much of, and what is it? Well, he's going to give tax cuts to private businesses that go into the ghetto. Now, in actual fact, private business is set up to make private profits. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not in the business of philanthropy. So they'll get their tax cut, and we'll have nothing in the ghetto, probably, but the rising expectation of what is now revolution. So I would say that as far as Mr. Nixon goes, I think he's an impossible choice domestically.
May I comment, Mr. Smith?
Please do.
Yeah. It seems to me that the earlier focus of Mr. Vidal here on human greed, you do remember, he says that he found himself wondering whether a party that was devoted to the concept of human greed could ever hope to get a majority of the American people to vote for it. Now, the author of Myra Breckenridge is well acquainted with the imperatives of human greed.
Well, I would like to say, Bill, if I may say, Bill,
what dominates him?
Before you go any further, I would like to say that if there were a contest for Mr. Myra Breckenridge, you would unquestionably win it. I based her entire style polemically upon you, passionate and irrelevant.
That's too invalid if you follow the word. One of these days, perhaps you can explain it.
You follow it,
yeah. Now, my point is that the number of people who are voting for the Republican Party agree that there are certain ways of doing things which are different from other ways of doing things. For Mr. Vidal to give us the pleasure of his infrequent company by coming back from Europe where he lives in order to disdain the American democratic process and to contemn a particular party as engaged in the pursuit of human greed requires us to understand his rather eccentric definitions. Is it greedy really for people to suggest that what matters to poor people is that they have houses rather than who should build them? It was Senator Bobby Kennedy, not Mr. Nixon, who first suggested a tax rebate for businesses engaged in this kind of pursuit. Is it really greedy to want to preserve our freedom? Have the Republicans been greedy by being prepared to support a war which kills American youth and uses up $30-40 billion a year? They may have been wrong, but greedy would strike me as very wrong-headed.
Well, by and large, however, it is a party which is based upon the business interests. It represents only 27% of the people of the United States. Somebody once pointed out Republicans are not a party, they're a class. And it's a class of, by and large, small businessmen with very strong views about not weakening the moral fiber of the poor, who now number 30 million people. And by and large, I quoted for you Mr. Nixon's record in the Senate, which was not terribly helpful as far as programs for the poor goes. And they do believe, however, Republicans, in spreading the money around amongst themselves. And they get, through big business, they get far more subsidies than the poor do. And as a matter of fact, we have a situation in the United States where they believe they should have socialism for the rich and free enterprise for the poor. The rich are subsidized, and the poor, alas, I think our military budget is something like $75 billion. And I agree entirely about the horrors of the war with Mr. Buckley. We're bound to agree on something. And only $2 billion is spent for poverty programs, which all the Republicans, to a man in House and Senate, have been opposed to.
The thing about the poverty program, and of course the thing about the democratic system, is that there ought to be a party free to discuss that which is wrong in a particular concept. And it is widely acknowledged by a lot of people, many of them Democrats, that the poverty program hasn't worked. It's certainly acknowledged by poor people who are victims of the rather comfortable rhetoric of Mr. Vidal. The principal contributions that have been made to the elimination of poverty in America have been made by millions upon millions upon millions of people who have not sought political favor, who work hard enough to create a surplus, which surplus is distributed in the way the surplus has been distributed during the past 4 or 5 generations in this country, resulting in the fact that we have the luxury of being able to focus on those who are poor in our midst, as though we can do something about it, which is something that no other country less occupied with human greed has the luxury.
The nice thing about the Republican Party is that every 4 years, after denigrating the poor amongst themselves, referring to them as freeloaders, they don't want to work, and I have many quotes here from Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon on the subject, and making fun of the minority groups with lovely little remarks like what was one of the headings in the National Review when Adam Clayton Powell got nabbed. The headline was, "The jig is up." Well, this sort of kind of pleasantry that you get in the Republican Party, I should say in the right wing all over the United States. And then every 4 years you get this sort of crocodile tears for the poor people because they need their vote. Well, I don't think that they're going to vote for any of the candidates unless by some terrible accident the Democrats get split hopelessly at Chicago, which couldn't well happen, and Eugene McCarthy's people not vote. In which case, I think Richard Nixon might very well become the next president, and I shall make my occasional trips to Europe longer.
Yes, I think a lot of people hope you will.
Yes, Bill.
As a matter of fact, Mr. Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., who's a member of your party, not mine, reminds you of your promise to renounce your American citizenship unless you get a satisfactory party in November. But
I didn't quite what I said, Bill. However, now, Bill, that's not quite what I said. I said it would be the morally correct thing to do if the war did not end. But I can behave as immorally as the Republican.
I can believe that, too. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Vidal makes the recurrent mistake of distorting my remarks, my presence. My remarks are not interesting to a national audience, but when we will discuss...
I think he is true. That's true, Bill.
Well, I'll try to interest him.
Yes.
But when we discuss the figures up without him taking power to me, the point precisely of that editorial was that Mr. Powell's invocation of the fact that he was a Negro, in order to immunize him from anything, to immunize him from committing libel, to immunize him from stealing the money that his wife didn't earn, to immunize him from a complete contempt of the proscribed procedure of the House of Representatives was not a satisfactory argument that was represented. Now, it is quite true that Reagan is capable of talking about freeloaders, so am I, because there are freeloaders. It is one thing to say that a society ought to concern itself with the plight of its poor. I think the Republican Party is saying that. But it is quite wrong for any party to fall into such demagogic length as to suggest that everybody who is poor simply because he cannot find work.
Well, that is often, however, a Republican line, and Reagan, in cutting back the welfare with the Office of Economic Opportunity, he rejected something very proudly, something like 12 programs. Now, these were programs not only to help the poor, but to help them find jobs. Meanwhile, with several denunciations, which would like I'll quote you, on freeloaders, on welfare, and how it encourages immorality and divorce. I assume he was on unemployment insurance when he divorced Jane Wyman. And I suppose it is a wicked thing that people don't have money, but in actual fact, in California, those who are on those rolls who can work but don't work, they estimate to be about 5%. So about 95% might have been helped by the Office of Economic Opportunity, and he rejected very proudly. He has the #1 record of any government in the United States for that. Though you did mention at the time in one of your columns that Pat Brown also rejected several of their programs. You were wrong. Indeed, Pat Brown never rejected one.
Well, you're saying that I was wrong doesn't necessarily make it so, but Mr. Vidal's problem is, I suppose, best exemplified by the fact that the American people in whose behalf he speaks with occasional eloquence seems to be able to get along very well without him. It was Mr. Reagan who, notwithstanding the fact that, like the Republican Party, he ran on a platform advocating human greed, won the Democratic contest by 1 million votes, all of them Democratic votes, since it was required to have 1 million votes. But I think figures. Now, this being the case, it seems to me that they either are transcending your analysis, or else they're so dumb.
But Bill,
they don't benefit from your
if I may say so, the electoral process often makes great errors. I think you would agree, according to you, it's made nothing but errors since 1932, with a sort of 8-year interregnum of a man that you didn't much admire. In fact, you criticized Richard Nixon for his unctuous love and attention of the great general. Unctuous is a rather good word.
Yes, but I can account for those errors. I can account for those errors other than by using these neurotic terms that you are so fetched by. I say the Republican Party is here to do a responsible job. To suggest that they are here simply as an instrument for the exploitation of the people is to engage in a disease kind of analysis, which increasingly Mr. Vidal finds to his liking. Fortunately, it's not a national concern. Perhaps the Republican Party should have a platform on how to deal with Vidal. If absolutely necessary, I will write it for them. But meanwhile,
I wonder what they're going to do with Reagan. I'd be very, very nervous. You have written lately of your intimacy with Reagan and with Nixon, and that you've discussed the Vietnam War with them, and that you are satisfied with their positions. Since you're in favor of the invasion of Cuba, since you're in favor of bombing the nuclear potentiality of China, since you're in favor of nuclear bombing of North Vietnam, I'd be very worried about your kind of odd neurosis. More like neurosis being a friend of anybody who might be a president. If I were one of the candidates, I would say, Bill Buckley, stay home.
I would be very worried, too, if you had such a honking view of what it was that I've advocated. I've never advocated nuclear bombing in North Vietnam.
You have. I'll give you time and place if you lose you.
Well, you won't. I will, because I know why. The nuclear bombing of Red China struck me as it struck John F. Kennedy as a viable proposal in midsummer 1963. I advocated the liberation of Cuba at the same time that Mr. Kennedy ordered the liberation of Cuba.
You were in favor, Bill, if we don't mind. Now, wait a minute, don't step away from the record. You said we should enforce the Monroe Doctrine and invade Cuba the sooner the better in your little magazine whose name will not cross my lips, April 1965. You favored bombing Red China's nuclear production facilities the 17th of September 1965 in Life magazine. And you suggested the atom bombing of the North of Vietnam in your little magazine, which I did not read, but I'm told about, the 23rd of February 1968. So you're very hawkish. And now, if both Nixon and Reagan are listening to you, I'm very worried for the country.
It seems to me that the Republican Party has shown a record of greater sobriety than Mr. Vidal, who boasts of not reading something which he is prepared to misquote in the presence of the person who edits it.
Now, Bill Buckley, if the quotation is exact,
we know that your tendency is to be feline. But just relax for a moment and take very simply on this. I have not advocated, I'm not horrified at the prospect.
Well, I just quoted what you said. What and where? Now, are you saying, didn't you say?
I am saying that I didn't say it. That your misquotation.
Tune in this time tomorrow night, and we will have further evidence. The Bill Buckley, cold warrior turned hot.
That's right, and about the human greed of everybody in the world except yourself. And then tomorrow I'll say what Mr. Vidal thinks about the Kennedys.
Good night, and let me tell you.